I remember like it was yesterday, those cold days, 4 long winters creating a feature film about homelessness. Today, I'm going to share that story with you, the story of how it all came to be. No, I can't do it this way. There's only one way to tell this story. I've got to go back out there. This feels better. There's something about the way the cold feels on my skin, the way it fills my lungs with cold air, the way it helps us appreciate the warmth, just how the suffering helps us appreciate joy, and darkness helps us appreciate light. I went through my first depression when I was only 11 years old. At the time, I didn't know what was happening to me, but I knew one thing. I was afraid. Fear permeated every part of my body. From the moment I would wake up to the moment I'd fall asleep, I'd be in a state of sheer terror, unable to function. The most frightening part of it all, though, was that I had no idea what was happening to me. Since then, I've gone through depression about every 5 years or so. Each passing depression led to an awakening, though, a deeper level of consciousness. And I was one of the fortunate ones. I had a family supporting me, lots of understanding friends. I was healthy and fit, so I lost myself in that. Sometimes the best thing I could do was just to get out of bed and go for a walk. And if you've been through depression, you know how hard that can be sometimes. So I'd go for a walk every day for at least 15 minutes. And it was these walks that led to the creation of Project Cold Days. It was my 5th severe bout with depression. I was walking alone one night in the dark coldness of the winter, walking along an icy path. Snow was falling down. The pathway was so thick and covered with snow, I felt like I couldn't push along anymore. I fell to my knees, I crumbled, and I started sobbing uncontrollably. I surrendered, no longer willing to fight it. I had nothing left within me to fight, so I gave up and I laid on the ground and I looked up at the sky and snow was falling down onto my face, mixing with my tears. And suddenly I had a realization. This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. But why? Why was I suffering as I walked down that icy path alone? I haven't told anyone this, but the truth is, I made Project Cold Days over a girl. I'm going to make a film, and it's going to be amazing, and she's going to notice me. Yeah, I made Project Cold Days over a girl who broke my heart. But looking back, it wasn't her who broke my heart. I broke it on my own. We all have these moments in our lives, these pivotal points that we can never forget, these times when we can change our trajectory, and from there on, everything can change. This was that moment for me. I knew I had to steer my ship in a new direction, and from here on out, I was never the same again. I continued to suffer, but I suffered in a different way. I had a deep amount of compassion, empathy. I began to see the connection of all beings in the world, and I continued to go on my walks. As I walked down the streets with that profound sense of empathy and compassion, I began to notice the people there, and I wondered, what were all the things that happened in their life that brought them there? They're going through the same thing that I am, but they're alone on the streets with nowhere to go. What were their stories? I wanted to tell them, but at that point, I didn't know how. What was the most profound piece of art that ever moved me to have more compassion for other people? And it was obvious, documentary films. I loved documentary films, and I decided this was going to be the medium I would choose to tell their story. Had I known it would take me 4 years, I would have ended up in the hospital multiple times, spent all of my life savings, and nearly lost my life a few times. I probably wouldn't have done it. I just finished a time lapse of myself, of my face slowly freezing, and this is what I look like. It's not makeup either, it's real. I can barely move my mouth, but I can smell a little bit. I felt limitless. It felt like nothing could stop me. There was a profound lightness within me, whereas once there was a heavy darkness, light was slowly beginning to come out. So I continued taking those walks, but instead of passing by those people on the streets, I'd stand and talk to them, and I'd hear their stories, and they were fascinating.
When I'm depressed and just not in a good mood, I just wish somebody who walked past me would just be like, hope you have a good day, you know what I mean? And it's like, most of the days aren't good. You know, it's depressing life, and most of the time if I'm in a bad mood, you know, I might seem tough, or I might seem like I'm an angry person, but it's just because I'm sad, you know? And I don't know. I wish people who had a good life and had things going well for them just saw homeless people or people who are using drugs for what they really are, you know, not for what they are in that moment, but for who they are deep down. And maybe if people had some more help or some more, you know, love, then maybe they'd be able to get out of the hole they're in.
But how the hell do I make a feature film when I have no training in photography? I had never been an artist before. I had never even used a professional camera. I was a network engineer, so I had to start from the bottom. A few months of listening to those stories, I decided it was time. I bought a professional camera and I began to take it out with me. And that was how it all began, right? No, it didn't begin that way. And there was a good reason for that. You can't just bring a camera up to someone's face and expect them to trust you. Once I had a camera with me, I felt like the new kid at school. Everyone looked at me funny. No one trusted me. No one wanted to be my friend anymore. So I circled back, found a new plan of action. The first person I called was the CEO of the biggest shelter in Ottawa. I spoke to her and I told her my idea. She loved it. I talked to the deputy mayor of Ottawa. I talked to every single shelter in the city. And I sold them the story. I sold them the idea. And truth be told, I was lying to them the whole time. I lied to everyone. Back then, I pretended like I knew what I was doing. I pretended like I was a filmmaker, but I wasn't. So why did they agree? I don't think they agreed because of the facts or the figures. They didn't agree because I said I was a filmmaker. They agreed because they felt it. They felt it like I did. Like there was nothing that was going to get in my way from finishing this film. But I went on to start without a camera. For 2 years, I spent all of my time in homeless shelters, different parts of the city, talking to homeless people, hearing their stories, understanding what it really is like to be out on the streets. It wasn't until 2 years later that I was truly ready. I was ready to start filming Project Cold Days. But in the midst of all this, something miraculous had happened, something that I didn't even realize. I was so focused on meeting other people and hearing their stories, so focused on making this film happen, my depression had faded away. It was replaced with something else. It was replaced with purpose. Two years later, I wasn't a stranger anymore. I fit right in with the community. I spent so much time at the homeless shelter that people began to think I was living there. No longer did I have to approach people to hear their stories. They began to gravitate towards me. And surprisingly, they began to become willing to tell me those stories on camera.
Right on. It's 4 years, you must have a lot of footage.
Oh, I have tons of footage.
Wow, what is your passion with like doing this?
I don't know, man. I think it's because I've had my own issues, you know? Things changed for me in my own life too. I stopped going to events, I stopped drinking, I stopped going to parties, I stopped caring about appearances. I yearned for those genuine human connections, ones that I felt were much more real with folks on the streets. People on the street are just surviving day by day. They have no appearances to put on. They're their true selves. the farthest from a fake Instagram personality you can imagine, and I loved that. I cherished that. These people weren't just film subjects, they were my friends. Through this entire time, I still had no idea what I was doing, but I was following those gentle hints from the universe, following them relentlessly. Anytime I had an inkling that there was something I should go out and shoot, I went there and I shot it, and I stayed committed. Three years later, I knew this was my last winter. I knew I had to finish the film, but I didn't know how. I didn't have main characters, I didn't have a story. At this point, all I had was random footage of people I'd talked to, footage of the streets, footage of sunsets and sunrises. It was beautiful and all, but I had no story. So how was I gonna find it? I never found those people, and I never found that story. It turned out that they'd find me. Everything came together in that one final winter. Synchronicities happened everywhere I went. I had deep faith at this point. The universe had given me a tremendous gift. Magic was happening all around me, right in front of my eyes. And at this point, I was getting good with the camera, so when those moments happened, I made sure to capture them. So filming was done at this point, and I had to go into post-production. And oh boy, I thought the hard part was over, but the hard part was just about to begin. I had over 100 hours of footage, and I had to put it all together and make a story out of it. Something that people were willing to watch. Panic set in. I spent 4 years making this film, suffering the whole way, and yet I had no way to put it together. Like everything else in production, I didn't need to find it. It found me. For months, I was completely lost, and I just waited and waited and waited. But then one day, in a moment of quiet stillness, inspiration struck. I knew exactly what I was gonna do. I'd make 4 parallel storylines, and they would all intertwine together. The film would be one day and one night, and that's it. Some of the reviews of the film have noted that the editing was masterful. Yet I had never edited anything before, and I had no idea what I was doing. I just followed the universe's guidance. I opened up space in my mind, and I allowed that space to be filled with inspiration. One of the biggest risks I took was getting an original score for the film, which for an independent, unfunded film made largely by one person is kind of insane. But I decided it was something that I needed to do. And at the time, the person I was working with became very unreliable and flaky. I couldn't count on her any longer, so I had to let her go. Panic set in again. How am I going to finish a film without music? But the universe already had an answer waiting for me. I just didn't know it yet. One day, I was sitting watching my favorite TV show, a show called Louie, and there was a magical scene. Now tell the truth. You're just scared. Like a rookie.
You got nothing or you would have shown me now. So get out. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Fine.
Lick, I can't give up on this. I don't, This is either
a door or a wall for me.
It's either the beginning,
or the end.
Please.
Okay then, let's see the funny. 3, 2, 1, go. Funny. This is it, bud. You want me to start at 1 and go up? 1, 2, 3, funny? Okay, last chance and then we're really done. Done and done. Let's go, kid. You want the big gig? Let's see it. Make me laugh at the count of 3. 1, 2.
You know what your problem is?
I'd watch that scene over and over and over again, moving and swaying to the music. It was incredible. What if I contact the person who makes the music for the TV show? It was a long shot, and I ignored it. Until it came up again, and again, and again. So I looked him up, and I sent him an email. It should have been impossible, but a year later, I was in New York City. The music turned out to be absolutely magical. Finally, after 4 years, the rough cut of the film was complete, and I planned a spectacular way to show it.
Documentary film in Ottawa tonight. Project Cold Days aims to give people an honest look at what it's like to be homeless in the capital in the dead of winter, with a special focus on mental health and addiction. It premiered tonight outdoors at the Shepherds of Good Hope.
One of the big concepts of the film is that it is an experience of surviving homelessness in the winter. It's what does that experience feel like to go through the entire winter with no place to call home.
That premiere made it to the national news, and people began to notice. I started showing the film at homeless shelters across the city, and then I got invited to show it at City Hall, and then Parliament Hill, and then CBC called.
Thank you for listening to me today. Thank you for being a part of this. My name is Stephen Coleman, and this is Project Cold Days.
Everything I had dreamed of as a little boy was becoming true. I left my engineering job. I decided I was going to become a filmmaker. Things were going great, but I wasn't. I thought at this point, when I completed the film, that I'd be happy, that I'd be fulfilled, but I wasn't. I was more angry and frustrated with life than ever. I fell into another depression. I couldn't believe it. How did I get back here at the same place I was when I started all of this? For years, I thought that finishing this film would solve all of my problems and I'd find happiness. But that's not the way it works. I found myself in a place of deep fear, despair, darkness. I felt completely lost and alone, like a frightened child. It felt even worse this time. The fear was so palpable I could barely function. I couldn't even get out of bed. I couldn't even go to the grocery store. This time, though, something had to change. I knew I wasn't going to keep going through this. I had to do something different. For 6 months, I went deeply inward. I learned everything I could about mental health and the human condition. I began to meditate. I began to practice yoga. I began to shed my old self. Depression, it was saying, fuck you. I don't want to be this character anymore.
I don't want to hold up this avatar that you've created in the world.
It's too much for me.
You know? And you should think of the word of depressed as deep rest. Deep rest. Your body needs to be depressed.
I was humbled more than ever by this awakening. Compassion bled through the pores of my being. During this time, I continued to show the film, but it was different now. In my talks before and after the film, I shared my story with deep vulnerability, and people connected to that.
Making a film is kind of like going into the soul of your body and not knowing what you're going to come out with. You know, making a film is fighting our own personal demons, and for me, I fought a lot of them, and I think during the making of the film, there was a lot of dark places I went, and people who were around me experienced that. And it was very difficult for a lot of them, and most of them ended up departing because, you know, I was suffering a lot, and not many people could put up with the things I was going through.
Afterwards, people would come up to me in tears, sharing their stories with me. People connected to that vulnerability. They connected to my story of overcoming depression. It seemed like every day a new person found me and told me their story and was desperate for help. Their stories were often different, though. Different in that they had no support. They were often alone, with no friends or family to help them through. They felt lost, they felt alone, they felt like they had nowhere to go. They felt like no one was there for them. Pride often gets in the way of us seeking help, but that very egoic structure is the one that is the cause of our suffering, and it wants us to continue to suffer. If there's one thing I know, it's that we can't do this alone, and the only way to truly heal is to come together as a community and share compassion and love with one another and support each other. We have to pick up those people who have fallen down and help them find their true purpose. Depression has become the silent killer of our generation, but it doesn't need to be. And I'm going to do my part to help change it. I was inspired by one of my favorite books, The Alchemist, to create this series, and that's why I'm calling it Transmuting Depression. It's not surviving depression, it's not getting through depression, it's not waiting for it to pass, it's taking those hard times and turning them into something amazing. That's what an alchemist does.
"You are almost at the end of your journey," said the alchemist. "I congratulate you on pursuing your personal legend."
"And you've taught me nothing along the way," said the boy. "I thought you were going to teach me some of the things that you know. I've lost everything on this journey and still haven't found my treasure."
"Everything you need to know you have learned through your journey. There is only one more thing you must learn. Listen to your heart. It knows all things because it came from the soul of the world, just as a grain of sand has."
"But why do we have to listen to our hearts?"
"Because wherever your heart is, that is where you will find your treasure."
"My heart is agitated. It has dreams, it gets emotional, and it's become passionate over a woman of the desert. My heart is a traitor. It doesn't want me to go on."
Your heart is afraid that in pursuing your dream, you might lose everything you've won.
"My heart is afraid it will have to suffer."
Tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself. No heart has ever suffered when it goes in search of its dreams, because every second of the search is an encounter with the universe and eternity.
Is that the final thing I need to know?
What you will still need to know is this. Before a dream is realized, the soul of the world tests everything that was learned along the way, so that we can master the lessons we've learned in search of our dream. That's the point at which most people give up. It's the point at which, as we say in the language of the desert, one dies of thirst just when the palm trees have appeared on the horizon. Every personal legend ends with a dreamer being severely tested.
The boy remembered an old proverb from his home country. The darkest hour of the night comes just before the dawn.
Project Cold Days was my personal legend, but it wasn't my treasure. I didn't find my treasure in the cold, dark nights. It was not in the storm or in the suffering. I never found my treasure. It found me. It found me in a gentle breeze, a tree dancing in the sunlight, 1,000 leaves swaying in harmony, a quiet moment with a friend. My treasure arrived with little fanfare in a gentle moment of stillness, every moment which has surrounded me. The scent of a pine tree, a flower blooming. It found me in the warmth of the sun glistening across the water, a single blade of grass, the birds soaring across the night sky, a broken old bridge,
the skyline of a city as the sun sets. My treasure has never left my side, a loyal friend who loves me and will love me into eternity. In the next 10 episodes, we are going to meet some incredible people. People who have transmuted their suffering into awakening. They'll share their stories of transmutation and teach us how to grow along with them. Each episode will have a focal point, a subject matter which can propel us to a life of awakening, of harmony, and of bliss. The first subject we will explore is
vulnerability,
with a very special and magical person named Kate Dury. She is going to share her sacred path with us in the most courageous way. There can only ever be one present moment. And that moment, like you, I, and the universe, are all one, sharing this wondrous place together in harmony. Thank you for being a part of it with me.